Hello, it was consciously with tribes apart and with exceptions. When the Legion first made moves, excuse me, I should have checked my peers before. And with the, and as a nature that is relevant to where and to how. For example, the countries of the Republic for which we stand, America, and for which their countries stand, their distinct identities, as grouped as the species, human volume, but not speaking about through this filtered ones. Since semi ancient times, there are proofs that when the Legion first moved together consciously, where humanity was moving, it was with exceptions, and it was as in nature consciously as the volume science, trying to consciously being led, understanding why and the benefits of it, and how to understand it, everything. In other words, we how we are humanity volume science slash S, individual grouped and together. They understood things that, in other words, the articles, they are about the individual. They are about that first, left to right, positive, distinct identity of positive of the ancient snow people, ancient slash timeless. But this is in and where it being the only thing that is hyper invisible but still discernible is functionals. For example, being the identity of the hyper simultaneous, being essential to being able to be critical. I mean, in other words, be able to deal with a finite group and together, all then all that is simultaneously true and not true and true differentially. So there's a difference between truths that are criminal insidiousness natures of truth. And this is a context where each modern nation had before, even the semi ancients. By the time latter semi ancient times came, everyone had already only experienced. Science is only remembered having been self valued for good reasons, but even those good reasons mixed simultaneously with bad ones as collusions, where they effectively forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, tricked the entire volume of the identities that would be they knew would be defended wrongly as fact to be nature, as suits and ties encounters, for example, manifest relative to this, where how there are value treatments and positive and negative treatments that leave out the significance of their roles recorded, even where they are unknown, because the responses to people where they could point this out. In other words, our countries have collusions at World Trade Center locations. There are other countries' equivalents as victims slash hyper victims, just as even if it was made up, the witch trials, those judges, everyone associated with those locations, all exceptions tied to them, not just the prisons tied to them, and the locations that train them, the campus, not just the campuses, not just all locations, including people's homes, parks, spots next to every place, including, this was consciously making a raise, people, a difference, and asking people questions about that and locking them in to quality of fact human nature couldn't defend itself. as individuals, no matter how powerful they could get, as group thought, can't defend the finite. And now it's forcing people. You see repeated, they have time to keep repeating issues. Just they're picking out specific issues before the courts because they're leaving out, to an extent, they understand, as everyone does, and where they pretend other. But, in other words, relative to the breaching matter, everyone blamed on other things other than themselves. People, because of the nature of how defended, how it is the logic of humanity regarding the significance of how we have had our short words and the short words of our founders as individuals. You can't understand what really shows up what they were about was how they had to counter extort the other, was how and simultaneously was why they had to counter extort the other founders, and the value of why that simultaneously was true is also there. And this is because the identity of the hyper-simultaneous, that is hyper-invisible conjunction, that is the identity, that is the coordinating conjunction, that is the correlative conjunction, and or is the coordinating conjunction, coordinating, correlating, and or subordinating conjunction. And when it can't be because that's invisible but still discernible, it is simultaneously not just that, but it is ground. And it is like the words as conjunction. A word being conjunction is distinct from a nature as a conjunction, but it is also non-distinct. One thing is distinctly non-distinctly and simultaneously being itself. Slash is, in other words, is distinctly, non-distinctly, and hyper-simultaneously it as itself, as the identity of forever nature that is space / existence, where we know to an extent it is most probable and to an extent discernible the answers / S, that all physical matter was generated and is generated by its identity of hyper-invisible but still discernible hyper-conjunction, its identity of relationship to itself, and the only increasing value of that equally. Also, because there is also demonstration of conjunction to itself simultaneously with two other automatically positive simultaneously, hyper-simultaneously, distinct, however, identities of positive. So a cell, as we know itself, manifests naturally positively. Positive. No criminally foreign influenced treatments of the syntax in description of the cell nucleus, cell body, cell wall / S. There are proofs that it is more probable and is more practical that ever since some ancient times, the stewards of the sciences, every campus, every nature of campus, because that's grouped, no. They have been certain type of victim / hyper victim made to blame other things, others, ourselves. Where and how? For example, each of the sciences had roles with the breaching method that was entrenched north colonies and southern colonies, North America and South America, before our founders were even born. They wanted us to understand and explain, understand, and examine that, not to blame people wrongly, and even when rightly, because everyone was forced to roles with it. And this is a completely a fact, chibi nature oriented predicate acts delivery system method. But it is also because of how it is before greater than that and more finite than that, and increasingly, effectively, actively, an identity theft / fraud method. And I'm not even a lawyer. It is necessary to describe it this way. In other words, it is most overt / insidious at the same time, where and how they hurt the natural differences while pretending not to realize or to be able to understand that and how others can realize. Their nature gives us answers that are other than we are being told, simply distinctly from how the books are speaking in. It is a truth used as a lie. For example, on a mass scale, when they say, in other words, people don't have any research, and that's why their argument is no good. In other words, they're changing people's words if they use short words properly, and the exceptions associate that with it, they're getting away with how they've been fabricating audio and video transcripts, the police forms, and the interbranch, hundreds of countries. The phenomenon of this comes from how it used remotely and still uses remotely. Roles with entertained what can't be entertained. In other words, for example, they make us use, everyone will tell you, and the people who are dishonest about it have recorded ties to former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, even though I've never seen him, except one time in Connecticut, in a 2006 district court case, part of the case, / part of the case that was ongoing at the time of my father's death. Before the World Trade Center, these also after the World Trade Center attack. My father had proved inside the Ninth Circuit Court next to the World Trade Center, right before the attack. We had gone to New York and we had been in the Ninth Circuit Court, which is right next to the World Trade Center towers. This is why one of the reasons why I brought it up, because there were plots on that, and related to that, all locations recorded since effectively tied, and how. So when people start describing it, that's where and how they've been waiting for responses to people's short words. Also, relative are uses of the words, of the phrase, the first responders. And for example, where and how that is collusions, unwanted, that where they make collusions unwanted self-value. For example, is where and how native reactions are trained responses, where people who answer phones are simultaneously also not realizing their responses are also as collusions with what has already been between locations and on off all ages and natures of campuses. Conscious roles with uses of where victim predator slash hyper victim predator. The reason I have to call us both is because American history teaches us, we're taught honestly, properly, and sanely. I just forgot what we're doing. In other words, American history teaches us. There are five identities of truth that are true simultaneously, positive to and or relative to its identity of relationship to itself. Therefore, relativity to and as our quality of fact keeping nature slash IES. It requires us to be able to use the hyper invisible and contemplation. See this force, tricked, hurt, persuaded. See this, for example. So we can't leave out how all the identity ground locations were measured, maintained, self-valued roles with this method that has everyone speaking through others. Forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, because they're putting us in fake conversations with ourselves, fake ties to ourselves, fake natures of ties to ourselves. Then they're having people stand next to each other, even sometimes, and take pictures to make pretend they know the people. I never had a word of conversation with people next to the next to Millwoods Park and next to the side entrances to it. People with the intelligence community are involved with spots in next to schools, through intercities, and with their extended family members, as ones with a whole bunch of other countries. Also inclusions with them at corners of streets and behind people's backs at databases, as roles with conversations that are being and having been led by investigations and investigators, where and how also relative and relevant is how they've been victim predators, hyper victim predators. In other words, there was the breaching method that forced all to have entertained impositions upon their sense and sensibilities, to use Jane Austen's phrase, upon their identity theft, fraud, slander, to use the means that show the breaching method, singular, that is just like it is a hyperconjunction to all identities of volume that are the hyper that are the invisible but still discernible quality slash IES aspect slash IES in nature slash IES as each of the languages. They just like part of the reason that the people of the ancient republic at first, see, the sciences were at first not criminally foreign influenced. Everyone was really trying to understand and value how they could understand together the identity of the hyper simultaneous. And it showed them, the ancients, before sciences became criminally foreign influence, they couldn't fathom we would not. It showed them how to cause positive value nature progressions, acts, natures, evolutions, fruits, gifts, means out of nowhere. It showed them how to understand how an identity is a certain type of hyperpositive. There's automatically temporary positive. Could be criminal insidiousness natures of positive though. This is one of the neat reasons. See, in other words, the words like the Republic, the sciences have not been able to afford. For example, where and how they could be self-valued victim predator, hyper victim predator, / hyper victim predator. That means simultaneously denying the significance of the sciences having been criminally foreign influenced. And you, as voicings and uses of those identity ground locations, where that to describe that victimhood properly describes the torture method, singular. One of the things that American history taught us, or teaches us if we examine it properly. It means we're examining its nature. And that means we have to use its nature's nature. And and the only increasing value of that to discern it. That means we have to use discernment of that which is hypernative. That means we have to value Native American rights as means to discern with our own. For example, how our own rights, they are overtly / insidiously, as the people of New York City, not Native Americans, especially if the ones who are Native Americans, especially differentially, everyone actually. This is like, for example, each of the notes of music, the 7 of Western music, exception, each are in demonstration, the same thing. What they are in demonstration of, for example, is how one identity is itself, as a cell is, as a body is, for example, except for how it is parts. But this is how it is hyperconditional to and as. And we as its identity of a relationship to itself, and the value of that. With Earth's a special difference. Hyperconditionally from and as our own, but know us with a grouped identity too, which is also relative / hyper relative. As the identity of hyper relativity / relativity theorem, the English theory, that the theories of the sciences, of modern languages, even of math, even. So they have things claim math that are not math because they still have psychology, even overtly / insidiously. Delusions right. I'm not a doctor. Part of the way they've been getting away with this is we cannot leave out how all identity ground locations were measured and maintained, not just exploited victim predators there. And everyone hyper victim. Hyper, that's relevant too, because like with the fentanyl, it forces reactions needed. Even if they made it up, witch trials, the standing existence of them, the locations involved with slavery, North and South, effectively employed then, effectively employed now, as a fact treatment, as a subject treatment, as a subject used to measure and maintain with all subjects. People collusions, blaming other things, others, ourselves than the breaching method, for example, and defending that. Defenses of that, defenses of logic that have inherently, actively, and progressively demonstrations, hyper-evidential quality aspects in nature's manifest. Quality/IAS, rather. The sciences share an identity, and where they appear not to is where and how it is using them to to understand the importance of not leaving out a special difference, and that is the subject of the contemplation of prayer and of pantheism, which is an ism, which is about the invisible but still discernible. Only an individual could defend the finite. So we have the phenomena of people, of, like, for example, the agencies and their kids. Each age of fact-keeping nature was shown as identities law. There, with the overt criminal enterprises, private ones, insidiousness of people A through Z, collusions with what also, and if you're not, they're gonna be collusions with as complete strangers, timed, changing people's words, faking people's words, and with other people doing it for everyone, influencing and leaving out those roles. How many legal cases in formal interactions, communications left out? The breaching method, and the fact that there were other names involved with people's communications, and that people before that, and they're also leaving out other things they said. So in other words, they have people, the complete strangers that never had communications at all, mixed with ones that just say things at corners of buildings and they'll never see the person again. Make a couple exceptions, the person walking the same thing. They're lying about exceptions, exception nature, the way a breaching method knew they would. The certain type of victim / hyper victim that speaks for integrity, that speaks for morality, that tries to, while leaving out what's actually recorded. We know that sickly distinctly from the Native Americans, the people of New York and their locations, the Native Americans themselves, sickly distinctly, depending on where they live. They are victims from the people of New York City. We know the people of New York City are victims. If we examine honestly and properly, the suburbs are tactically denatured. They were tactically denatured while there was still is still being sustained against Native Americans, sickly distinctly against every other American. Use/S of other things, others, ourselves, being blamed, having been blamed, and that defended for the real causes of negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, and insidious / overtly criminally foreign influenced / delusions raw subjects treatments and qualities of human fact keeping nature. How that has gotten away with the behavior. So they have the behavior of a psychopath, only known because the only sophistication has come. This knew that it could get modern identities. Or back to the music. The music, for example, this is the same thing being demonstrated. Each of the sciences share an identity box things. There are proofs it is more probable, is more practical, and there are increasing means to demonstrate it. So that boxing, martial arts, and wrestling were more probably revealed, where and how and while the Republic and exceptions and exception nature were also having been revealed, but now as criminally foreign influenced revelations and processes of judgment of positive and negative treatments. Identity has conjunction slash hyper slash hyper conjunction to positive and negative simultaneously, just as values do. And why and how both value and identity have relativity to positive and negative and to neutrality simultaneously is because of where and how and why. It is where it is not, it is the identity as what is where, how, and why simultaneously. Why is where it cares about our subjects' treatments, our exceptions treatments, our exception nature treatments. For example, where and how it is positive to and as itself. The identity that really is true always, as space slash existence. Again, had science been influenced, regardless of the motivations, through the motivations narratives regarding people, regarding what they say at locations, it is effectively used to keep at formal locations like courts. All exceptions tied to them, even prisons, even the state offices, even the court state offices. So the courts individually grouped and together. Certain type of victim slash hyper victim. Every country needs to self-value simultaneously, having been left out the integrity necessary to answer questions what caused which trials, even if they were made up, what were they about? One thing we know they were made up to an extent. One thing we know, many of us, is that we had left out how that have relativity to the slavery that happened in northern colonies, southern colonies, entrenched, the torture method entrenched. We left out how the World Trade Center attack was effectively used to pull off roles self-valuing, roles with torture, with investigators who had been before the World Trade Center attack as our side with a whole bunch of other sides. Collusions, and specifically where and how they are used remotely because they can't defend that. And where it's relative, increasingly, every place else where our subjects' treatments are, where their good excuses are mixed with ones that are criminally foreign influence and tactically delusions raw. Not one has fought the way our founders asked us to understand. Was more probably they communicated to understand the fact cheap endanger slavery against everyone, including themselves, that had already been entrenched, that torture method, that fake stuff you just put into databases and made people remember the collusions between overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and the interbranch, and their uses of readings of statutes, criminally foreign influence, while pretending other. So screening, and where and how, for example, as example of where it's relevant and relative to where and how understanding that breaching method at the locations and relative to memory and to the Republic's database, its database relationship to itself, and the only increasing value of that. But it could be, and still is, as criminal insidiousness, natures of positive treatments. If they had tried to bring it back as Legion at our country or any other country, already they have the sciences abridged in that self-value, certain type of victim slash hyper victim who's self-values that no matter what industry you're going to go into, and then you're going to speak anyway, you know, it's just things out of things. Well, I'm not the person. See, a lot of that's why we have to address that criminal insidiousness that left and leaves out the significance of the smallest individual finite voice. See, the people that are shown that the needs to hide that, in other words, all formal logic in at locations. It was already taken with collusion with overt criminal enterprises, private ones. That means each age of their family members kept times needing to hide the same life progressions to other locations. And they looped that with collusions. They're putting kids next to kids. You have to speak things and use people's names, or you have to avoid people, and you still have to do that because they bring things. They put collude. They confessions also have to be brought up. Three natures of confessions that are simultaneously communicated by the hyperconjunction, right through every line. It means to discern this is with, for example, us grounded with black pupils, whites of eyes. And everyone to tell people who can't see that. The problem here is clear. But it's not the motivation. So they made those truths. They forced the Native Americans to fight against the Native Americans. But really what they were fighting for is fighting against a breaching method. Same thing that the colonists, because what are they really doing? They're making human volume science fight with human volume science and or be a unity as a criminal insidiousness nature of collusion. Even if when how fighting with themselves, jailing each other. The people that are running the jails, the people, the worst patients and criminals, even all exceptions, they have everyone use shock and awe, use the phrase, used through MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News. They recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. They have sources, Interbranch of Connecticut, involved with investigators, increasingly at all crime scenes, with where and how it is relative, where and how there is complete possession over subjects' treatments, and over self-valued roles with psychopath takes on morality and roles with uses of making exceptions with evidences treatments while increasingly preventing offensively the quality of fact-checking nature that proper at formal evidence locations. Therefore, increasingly, for example, self-valuing what they don't like, the stream of people going in there. Before there were a stream of people going into the courts, there were men and women hurting those kids on and off the campuses, where and how they don't know how to describe things, because like her, they're leaving out things because of the confessions involved. More than just demonstrations of how from off all locations there are men and women and there are kids as the certain type of victims at the same time, who are also the tools of the breaching method, keeping each age of correlation nature. Uses of self-value, uses of criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments, negative treatments, and of identity treatment simultaneously, effectively to prevent that which is true always, not denying the slightest exceptions, and using exceptions, exception nature the way nature uses it that we can't make up. Because there is a way it uses it. There are ways nature uses how it is one identity of volume, except for how it is plural identities of volumes that are shown to us with the extent we can discern of that which is true always, being used to make more of itself, the identity of space/existence. The identity of the hyperconjunction to itself that is positive. As each of the volumes of the languages, like the volume of the volumes plural of the articles a, and the. This is about the individual. The plus symbol on the left side of the ancient snow people. It is Little Rap Guy and friends will teach you about this. It is it's to show you there is a distinct identity of volume science, where and how it is distinctly, non-distinctly, and hyper simultaneously itself. That is the reason why and how we are each an individual distinctly, non-distinctly, and hyper simultaneously. So you have an apple. You have a pear. Or you could say that get the pair. So those are a, and the. It's not just because when before a word with a vowel that begins with a vowel, computer does not begin with a vowel. So I would say a computer. But an app begins with a vowel. So you would say an app. But it's not just because of that. See, but we have obfuscated all the languages and all the English grammar is actually capable of being used. Is also, by the by what is actually space/existence to show ourselves. We are consciousness, and we can know about these details about things because we are its consciousness. Just like all the parts of our body, have semi-nature relationship to our complete identity. Each complete identity has a semi-nature relationship to what has us, individual, grouped, and species body of volume science. So the phrase is about that which is grouped. And the article is about that which is, the articles a, and the, about that which is individual. And so the grouped is also the middle plus symbol of the ancient snow people with the two parentheses on both sides of them. We're automatically temporary positive. Those are three distinct identities of positive. One that we could discern, but only to an extent. And that requires use of how we could discern. That only to an extent when discerning simultaneously its identity of conjunction to the five distinct identities of sequence/simultaneous nature. In short, we have men and women colluding, timing when they could say things to people, to others, where they're going to be, how they got there, narratives with that. So they could fit that with where and how all investigators, where and how their uses of all distinct identities of victim slash hyper victim. But this already had originally stories new that could sickly distinctly maintain the individuals as the hierarchies of locations and of natures of thought and of the republics, grounding where and how it is this increasing identity of volume, not just as itself, not just as the earth, not just as the identity of it, they are together. And or that temporary positive, and even the means to make criminal and seditious natures of positive out of nowhere is forced from here, lethal IDs. And so, which is more probably and practically, is more and discernibly, lethal IDs is more probably having been understood and to describe force space nature transfer. But their definition of nature would use discernment of nature's nature and the value of that. So the discernment of the nature of Native Americans was imposed upon, and that had been sustained before our founders' parents were even born. Good afternoon, Adams. I'm not a doctor. Maybe someday. What is this is about when the Legion first moved, for example, this is about the republic for which we stand. Not just America, other countries, they're republics too. It is as individuals. We are distinctly individuals. Per how we are in grouped simultaneously. Know how women and men, like women could speak nicer and better. They have a strength, a means, a nature to speak better than we do, certain ways, to sing better than we do, certain ways. But then men have other strengths. But if you examine it, those are also really only exception nature, and the demonstration of the same thing, that there is an identity of a simultaneous nature. As a distinct volume science, as the species body we are, as bodies of individuals, and where and how it has the sexes manifest, not just as our species body. This is one thing a species is a body of invisible but still discernible volumes, plural, science / IES. Just like the sciences, so the sciences are locations, just like all the locations, all the memory locations of a computer. Their data, see, they're not evidence. Evidence is, I mean, it is evidence, same thing. So the Legion came from an ancient times before the sciences became criminally foreign influence. The science become criminally foreign influence. They could no longer entertain that, even if defenses. There are proofs that they had to defend themselves, and with the defense of themselves without realizing they're defending qualities, aspects of fact human nature, as volume science is tactical ulterior from the human volume science. We know this when we hear slavery being spoken about. We know that where and how simultaneously what I discerned and I know that you guys sensed, they parse it. They separate how Native American rights were hurt sickly distinctly from the you know, people based on the pigment of their skin. And the exceptions and exception were also and are still also roles forcing that nature of criminalist insidiousness with the subject's treatments that have nothing to do. But everything has to do it, because don't forget too, it employed everyone's sustained roles with what they didn't want, which caused what they didn't want. But when you have to respond to your roles with it forced, you're also wanting it. So now they increasingly can't speak about positive and negatives properly, about want, like they will want, needs. So they have our own certain type of victim / hyper victim predator. Doesn't realize so. For example, even with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, with the description of thought, the human fact treatment nature, science. Science admits that worse than a war zone and being tortured, overtly / insidiously, the people of the cities across the globe are. They were designed only capable of being so they could measure and maintain who's going to try to make them safer. They were going to try to make it worse so they could call out, so they could change and see who was going to be roles with it. Because they have to increasingly screen what nature is increasingly demonstrating. But to discern that, we have to, for example, so we have to use the extent of nature that we could discern to discern its complete self. So we have to use nature's nature in the value of that. So we know they are speaking about nature as what is only nature as criminal insidiousness nature. Only criminal insidiousness nature is of positive treatments, negative treatments simultaneously, and of identity treatments simultaneously, and of motivations, narratives, and natures simultaneously could get away with denying such overt. The suburbs have all kinds of inherent active and progressive grounded demonstrations our founders asked us to explain about how the breaching method forced everyone not to be able to speak and freely, while they simultaneously forced everyone to pretend they're speaking freely anyway. So we have to show at all locations how this is. They're making legislation, we have, you guys all have to be coached because you're certain type, not, as the species, the people that are legislators, they have to be coached. In other words, they already painted themselves worse than into corners as collusions. And they could discern this to an extent. But they can't think about it because the extent they know is increasingly tied to uses of locations like prisons, like courts, like their state judicial branch offices, like Connecticut, the prison offices, the spots next to it to a time. Recorded roles with this method that has people just say a singular thing to people on a campus. They make a quick instance of interaction between people, and they attach everyone to fake conversations, fake ties to each other, fake nature ties to each other. Then they do it off campuses, and their motivations, narratives. Now, they're also pretending that we're saying these things personally against ourselves. Because this is what has happened when, for example, someone wants to deny this, their motivations and their qualities, aspects of fact, their fact-treating nature is going to have an inherently active to it, and to an extent, discernibly how it's going to have increasingly, progressively to it. Self-valued qualities, aspects of fact-achieving nature, criminally foreign influence, delusions raw. That's what spoke simultaneously for New York City. For example, that needed this breaching method knew that all the employed roles without already having been sustained would self-value it needs to and have needs to that increasingly to keep that blamed on other things other than ourselves would set that up unfathomable to pretend that that's not tied to subjects. That's not hyper evidential. So we have to have discerned the hyper evidential. Computers work with the hyper evidential. And the experts on it, to an extent, they have an awareness that they will admit that there are needs by the extent that they won't because they can't afford to. For example, and where and how these are the people that have the most money, including the ones that are intelligence community. Every modern country individually grouped and together. It is more probable, it is more practical that algebra had been revealed as the process of science that the pantheism is about. That does not leave out the smallest finite detail, does not value them being or having been left out, and then pretending to be about finite anyway. For so many vaccines, like New York City, they have. This is a method that rushed. They knew that the courts would be rushed. The certain kind of people that of every science, every industry, every identity of the ground, location, its uses, used YR from across the globe. The most powerful countries with the most means. All the gas. Now they want to go out, everyone, good and bad reasons, both of them used to in other words, transition. We're going to transition to this. The whole employment is by the breaching method still first. Since before our founding parents were born. Involved with the torture at all locations. Involved with the design only allowed for the suburbs. And designed tactically to cause negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. Designed effectively to simultaneously use what nature was demonstrating instead of what it's using it, what it's to demonstrate it, apply it to demonstrations of as an excuse for means, the only means to, as roles, but the only means to cause positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures as criminal insidiousness natures of positive value treatments. And wherever there is a positive or negative value treatment, there is an identity treatment. And wherever there's an identity of treatment, there is its identity of volume science treatment. And that is where and how it is. Positive, true always, to the 5 identities of order. It is 5 identities of sequence / simultaneous nature. It is simultaneously. As a trinity, there are 2 groups. Grouped 5 ways and grouped 3 ways. And grouped a whole bunch of other ways. In other words, all the other ways numbers are groups. So the ancients would more probably teach that there are 3 before math was revealed, before the Legion was. And there were 3 identities of 0 that are only increasingly valued. Identity of conjunction to the only identity of space / existence. The only identity of the hyper simultaneous, which is that which nature demonstrated the ancients agreed needed to be discerned because they discerned where and how being an individual distinct identity of sequence/simultaneous nature at the same time. Also, in the same time, the same distinctly, non-distinctly, and hyper-simultaneously, being a simultaneous nature/sequence nature. And this is where and how more and more forever nature is being made. In many boxings, in the top of the Z, it's pointing back towards A, where and how more and more forever nature is being made. That is temporary positive automatically, but is also positive to itself. Again, as a hypervolume, as the hypervolume, just like a computer's identity of volume. As an identity of conjunction to the ground of itself, the physics of itself too. That's why and how it comes with that increasing volume, value, capability. But see, this could never be why and how. The other bodies of species and our own are part with answers. And while they are being questions. And while that's why there is one answer increasingly tied to it. And what it comes down to is why and how it is functional. Its identity of hypervolume, its identity of relationship to itself, and the value of that, how they're only increasing at the same time. It is the phenomenon of why and how we could discern the hyper invisible but still discernible, conjunctive to all the other invisible but still discernible. We have not been taught to discern that way. The volumes of English grammar, the articles, the phrases, the clauses, and as the sentence. I was watching a YouTube video, a short YouTube short by Judge Napolitano from the YouTube channel Judging Freedom by Judge Napolitano. And he was speaking about sentencing and some legal case. See, our founders left us to demonstrate how all sentencing, all identity ground locations, tasks, natural, were measured and maintained. Collusions with uses of them that are unnatural but as criminal insidiousness nature. Specifically, for example, where it could measure and maintain uses of all words like nature to discern who wasn't going to be collusions with criminal insidious natures of positive treatments and or negative treatments simultaneously, and as identity treatment simultaneously, where and how it has complete remote possession over our fact treatment nature uses and responses to where and to how we are a value/value progression. Again, now our system's tactical ulterior from its own hyper-native pure. Native American rights in volume /S are increasingly valued to discern how the hyper-native human species volume science, its group differences, sciences, as its science, and individual as the individual's science is being and having been denied. Celebrities and companies recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. They simultaneously pretend other and offensively pretend to care about success and jobs and be treating such subjects without not realize they know to an extent they have collusions with They know police forms. They know people that work with courts. They know judges, prosecutors. They know people from other countries. They are people from other countries. Individually grouped and together, now tactical ulterior from the volume science of how we are humanity grouped. We have male and female, manifest, per why and how the other species, distinctly from how the other species also have it. So non-distinctly too. Male, female, species volume science. There is the electrical, I'm not even electrical engineer, there's the electrical engineering of the hyper invisible, but still discernible, being demonstrated to us. English was revealed to teach this. The bottom of the Z is more probably having been used to teach about lethal IDs as force space nature transfer. But this being a definition of nature where it would be they were checking consciously to make sure it's not criminal and seditious nature of nature treatment, criminally foreign influence. See, this knew that modern countries and semi-ancient countries would counter things like criminal foreign influences by blaming other things, others, or selves wrongly, and while defending simultaneously logic and nature that couldn't do that and afford defenses of them themselves even properly at all locations, areas, and states. Every single place the species volume is. Every species, everywhere the species body has an individual body. Anywhere it has a difference, like a grouping, it is employed other. It is employed to, that's how we can discern the identity of the hypersimultaneous. There are answers why and how we are a species, individual grouped together, male, female, species, volume science / science is. That are simultaneous. See, these positives are positive simultaneous or not. The ancients knew they're constantly in the discernment, use of the discernment between temporary positive and lasting positive. But see, uses of this can't, more and more this needs people offensively of all political parties and exceptions to offensively entertain and or the groups to entertain what's either going to be a unity or a division or exceptions as collusions, or they're going to change that individual's words and they're going to sense it and they're going to be showing conscious uses of it. Each identity had means and has means since you are so young to understand that and to discern that there was a breaching method involved with history and their people are lying about it. In other words, while they're pretending passions and emotions, and while there are other subjects juxtaposed and timed uses of that are let out, that are left out, where we have subject treatments in the instances and with recollections of instances. Again, this hyper relevant to where and how effectively exploited is where and how they attach people that never had conversations and people that were they just take pictures of, make it look like they had communications that never were. They never even had words of conversation, but they were just took a picture next to them. Our peers, in other words. This is also where criminally foreign influence uses of all words. That they're worse patients and criminals and that they're interbranch originally everywhere there is formal reception of human fact, human nature, evidence, data. We have left this out. This is part of the answers that are simultaneous when you look at New York City, when you look at the suburbs, and when we look at where and how. If you bring up them individually or grouped, sickly distinctly, they won't let us bring up, extend upon the revelations tied to this, because it brings up revelations about the employments and rolls with them. which are employments by a breaching method that our founder left us to demonstrate. Certain type of victim slash hyper victim that the people that before anyone was born associated with the World Trade Center. And since right now, still as collusions with as roles leading up to that and since. Our military is criminally foreign influence. That's why they can't be the Legion. They can't afford, discern how they use the Republic, how they use positive and negative identity treatments, how they use and or how they use exception nature, and or how and why really they value it used that way. Because the answer is the short words. We are capable of making them and of understanding them when we are very young. See, this breaching method employed all those identity grounds, roles with this to keep individuals, groups on and off the record and unfathomed. Need to hide lipocrite, need to self-value. That's certain type of child abuse. That's certain type of elderly abuse. That's certain type of VA abuse, Veteran Affairs. That's certain type of locations next to state capitals. Abuse that is self-valued by a breaching method, a hyper predicate acts delivery system method. I'm not a lawyer. If anyone wants to deny that slavery was about a hyper predicate acts delivery system method, they're going to have inherent active and progressive to their logic hyper evidential proofs of it, and or they're going to also have delusions as proofs of it. I'm not a doctor. There are proofs that there are identity delusions, there are nature delusions, and there are physical delusions that doctors have gotten away with because of their collusions also with various natures of courts that we can't leave out, and remote roles with the worst patients and criminals that we can't leave out. Roles timed with overt criminal enterprises and private ones. There are time conscious uses of them between campuses where they make fake exceptions of people knowing each other, where and how relevant is the complete possession of the sense and sensibilities of people relative to such laws, as such collusions with known criminal enterprises, overt criminal enterprises, and private ones that we also know to an extent was one of the things true always that slavery was about. There were criminal enterprises juxtaposed with private ones, with insidiousness of the logic of people A through Z, and or they've hurt that person. They changed their words, faked their words, everyone. And they did it in group, everyone around everyone, to force this, to force it's a breach method so they can measure and maintain use remotely all the locations where the human volume is now, individually grouped and together. They did this effectively, have the countries grouped, suits and ties, counters, can't defend their logic and afford short words used properly, let alone where and how. There are three natures of short words that we need to use to make proper subject treatments with any of these subjects. So I use the phrase hot topics. Hot topics was used by Wendy Williams. Hot topics is used by Judge Napolitano. Hot topics is used by other people. Hot boxing. I used it and I changed it because right after I used it, because I make sometimes I make shadow boxing videos. I have to get back in shape. I'm gonna make a video about coming up. About, in other words, Javante Davis. I appreciate that. I thank you. He on Twitter said that he was feeling in that mood. He was gonna give someone a chance to fight for the title. I don't know if he said title, but to fight him. And so I accepted the challenge. And I haven't had. I'm getting ready now. It was raining. I was going to do it. Train yesterday. I don't have a gym, But I'm just gonna go do it in my trainer die, which is my father too. In other words, and I never had time to communicate with anyone. And where and how I was gonna get to that before I got to it. While I was getting to it, I was learning things that had nothing to do with boxing. Just people making statements I didn't have a chance to respond to yet. And which are people involved with stacking predicate, wire crime, mail crimes, identity thefts, and frauds with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and names on and off interbranch locations doing it, fabricating audio, video transcripts, rolls. Now, to hide what they did, fake conversations, fake ties to kids with police forms, foreign and domestic medical families. They should fear God. The overtly / insidiously the military's criminally foreign influence. That's not care for security. That's not care for their members. That's not care for faith in any field. And so they value such as exceptions, for example, to pretend other. They value, for example, such that was really behind when groupthink, which is a phrase used also. In other words, by the networks. And the networks were recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed they're being coached to attach me and other people and people of each age and the people around them to fake words, fake locations, fake ties to other people, fake natures of ties to other people. I caught them with a child abuser doing it and with others on a child abuse registry, interbranch with their kids, had roles with it. These are the same ones that with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and with the prisons associated with them. They have all kinds of uses of, they bring up other locations when they make statements to people just because they have it, they're going to be in that location. And then this is also relative to where and how used remotely, where all kinds of interbranch locations in legal cases originally and still. That's one of the things hyper-evidentially recorded that slavery is and was. It regards where and how, not just the overt criminal enterprises, not just the private ones, not just the criminal insidiousness of Native Americans hurting Native Americans A through Z, or getting hurt if they didn't, too, because that's always also forced. And so that's why and how, for example, increasingly valuable and needed needs to keep to examine how they also consciously, effectively had people blame other things other than themselves from where and how for the breaching method causing that, having caused it. People are just going to adapt and then try to survive. And they're going to make definitions of overcome that were simultaneously effectively, they knew they would only be capable of making them criminally foreign influence. Tactically delusions rot. And or nature roles, timed as the uses of all locations as they are actually manifest. This is worse than just interstates. And it is so effective, however, it was effective and it is still effective uses of the fake difference, of the fake liberated integrity of the intelligence community, interstates. They never had one location that wasn't criminally foreign influence. They have psychology, psychiatry. They have roles with all kinds of distinct drugs and treatments of subject treatments where they make that distinct. Consciously leaving out, they know to an extent too. In other words, we can't leave out how they've been preventing us from voices, but there are ways to criminally pretend that things should be solved by courts because there are differences between people. There are lawyers also doing this and planting the motivations narratives with a breaching method left recorded path of itself without logic. These are with elderly homes, uses that even the people roles with it don't understand the extent of. They just know they can't be honest with them. And it's simultaneously the only counters to it, investigators of that, and the campuses they went to, already being and having been kept needing to hide what they are also simultaneously increasingly effectively shown means it needs to use those locations to hide and to pretend just because that's why they're getting paid. And in other words, etc. It's not. I mean, there are additional reasons that we haven't accessed what we really think about each other. There are people pretending that they knew us when we were kids, and they made fake exceptions when we were kids, so we can't speak as adults. And they already locked themselves in backgrounds with the interbranch family members, with investigators, with conversations in response to that, where they're supposed to talk about things where they're not supposed to. All that effectively has already locked them incapable of proper treatment of any subject, because that begins and stays. Proper treatment of the hyper-simultaneous. And wherever that begins, it brings revelations. And wherever that begin, you see other in place with those short words that bring revelations. They bring you see obstacles in the place with logic that's pretending passions and emotions and motivations for it. That is also simultaneously tactically delusions rot and tactically criminally foreign influence qualities aspect of fact treatment nature where we need to like if they have roles with Connecticut Interbranch have been switching names, preventing writing since I was a kid, while simultaneously consciously stacking exceptions criminally foreign influence as collusions as well. And with whole wire crime methods. There's also part of the pattern that shows on and off the state judicial branch offices in Wethersfield and locations next to it have roles with identity theft, fraud, slander. And nature's communicating it as that. And they brought themselves up. They're also sequence shifting about that. These are people who were involved with where and how we have to use their names to get to the rest of the names. Like former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin. He's one of the people involved with houses along Church Street and uses of the corners of it and conjunctions to it. Involved with the DeMoro family, John DeMoro, and people with the name Joe DeMoro. A whole bunch of people from Central Connecticut State University in New Britain, all along the route from there to Wethersfield through Newington and to Wethersfield. Through time, they've been planting federal evidence as crimes, predicate acts, methods, roles. Foreign and domestic military, foreign and domestic interbranch, all kinds of foreign and domestic medical tied to them, like psychology drugs, psychiatry drugs. Then they pretend people, have mental diagnosis and things like that. They just follow all kinds of people every day. Increasingly, many pray. They're touching people to fake words, fabricating audio and videos, transcripts, the interbranch. Then this has relativity to them putting little kids even in jail. And through time, predators on and off the campuses with the child defenders, roles with it, the people putting them away, the people involved in the locations, the uses of the locations and such, because they're putting the arrays, fake sides, and counters to it, keeping used effectively to hide the breaching method influence things. This is an effective method that effectively showed each identity of liberty, including each of the individuals of the agencies, how they need to hide liability. They can't afford what our founders left us to communicate to be discerned. Why and how they have good reasons for that. That's coupled with where and how it is relative to where and how they are child abused and where and how that is relative. Let them deny it. Put them on paper, please. Everybody. Please get him a name. Who disbelieves? We should have legislation that says who disbelieves. If you have interbranch that are playing games with evidences in their databases and with the news media putting fake predicate acts and on and off campuses through time and intercity timed uses of it, because then they use the delays. They have a whole bunch of that. So they have Hartford campuses and they have New Britain campuses, and they bring it up with the subject treatments, where and how they have crime, they have predicate acts methods, where and how relative is where and how recorded is remote uses effective of investigators. They have spots with next to Trinity College through time involved with undercover pretending they are overt criminal enterprises, and even if they are overt criminal enterprise, private ones, they're involved with that time, involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders, motivations, planting narratives, as the ones involved leading up to the World Trade Center attack in that context and since. So they should fear God for their roles with this Jonathan Maiano, and with the people with the Wethersfield Pizza, involved with the state judicial branch offices, and with the Wethersfield Police wire crime acts and methods, forging names, switching names, the branches of government individually and grouped. The police judge in Napolitano, they're lying to you about this, and or with you, but you guys are also certain type of victims that don't even realize, because of how long you guys have had other used to measure and maintain, other communicated for our founders regarding the locations and names involved. These are names involved with the Webb House. In other words, they bring their names up. I don't even know them. And they brought it up years ago by approaching me and by repeatedly doing that and leaving out what I said, my responses, which is recorded also as part of their way means to discern. They have roles with predicate acts methods. And they have roles with methods, for example, pretending people make conspiracy theories. They've been getting away with it because on a mass scale, they tell people to pretend they don't understand others, and then they just put fake things in databases. That's part of the reason they got away with pretending that science has spoken for itself, or for honesty, or for integrity. See, the sciences are a bridge. Every science individually grouped in together. Someone please show this to Judge Napolitano and get them a response for the. They've been using the fabricating audio and video transcripts with not just parents but family members. They involve that as part of the syntax, where they get people to measure and maintain, leave out facts, and they're pretending, for example, their motivations. They're pretending to legitimately be measuring people. They are not. All exception nature are in demonstration the same thing too, which you can't leave out their uses of exception nature simultaneously. They've been attaching little kids and their families to fake descriptions of real bad things bad things that actually happen to them. They've been changing their words, and they've been keeping it complicated, because if you had followed those words correctly, they were communicating other than was being allowed to be told. For the torture method relative, these are also the people involved with various natures of drugs and medicines crimes with their patients and criminals before they got caught. They're doctors, as ones involved with various natures of courts, and off the state judicial branch offices, on off prisons like Sandy Hook campuses, a whole bunch of more names involved. So get them onto paper with the people with that Alex Jones too, and the courts that countered him, and the people with the Sandy Hook promise. I want a response for the people that there's people with the name O'Neill also involved with Whiting Forensics, involved since I was a kid, with people tied to campuses, involved planting, acting so people could take pictures and then they pretend to know them, as their roles with all kinds of falsified police reports, as their roles with the federal crimes described in those police reports too, and sequence shifts, as the people were involved with proven ones in the 9/11 context, proven after it, tied to the Ninth Circuit Court next to the World Trade Center attack. In the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, I believe it is a Court of Appeals, and that was leading up to it, but the names involved, but there were people with the name Scalora as the ones involved with the child defenders on and off the principal child defenders campus. These are ones who forced Saudis, tricked, hurt, persuaded Saudis to roles with them with federal crimes with the same campus and through time, consciously, with their extended family members too. And on off, and as their roles with methods on off the houses and the ones next to the ones as the victims. This is where they keep everyone victim predators slash hyper predators, self value. Where and how this is where exploited are those simple demonstrations that science has means to make through ourselves and is asking and was actually asking us to voice all exception nature that appear to be in demonstration of other and demonstration of the same thing. The celebrities and the sports figures, they've recorded to an extent they understand that that group differences. They get like a member, someone who's this believe for something like that, this religion, say. They're pretend someone else is prejudiced. So that's one of the things they could do to sequence shift. And as their roles with collusions with investigations, investigators, vetting identities. That's one of the things they do. Then when they use them as a weapon, then when the people respond to that group's uses, because they want to get to the volume, no, they started it. They're going to do that. Oh, well, you can't. That's why they forge names, switch names. If you try to do it and do it with respect and forget getting into that, they attach you to fake words, fake behavior. Replace what's actually audio recorded, video recorded. And as collusions with already being and having been increasingly stacked, fake communications between people stacked into databases, pretended into databases. Uses of needs for investigations at locations within regarding instances, not realizing, self-valuing, collusions with the same things as way worse collusions against the people they're hurting and lying about at the locations like next to the campuses and through the names there. They have certain type of victim slash hyper victim that the laws that make it worse for people to commit crimes if they're next to a campus, they're used to keep them effectively tortured, self-valued roles. Everything's designed still by the breaching method that designed the suburbs tactically denatured, reliant upon the breaching methods, criminal insidious natures of means to cause positive value nature, progressive action nature, or worse, as while it was consciously causing negative value nature, progressive action nature, already had sustained before our parents were even born, Native Americans fighting from Native Americans. That's how to discern American history. That's how to use. So they want to fight about who knows the most names and things like that in details, leaving out the most important ones. The predicate acts, hyper predicate acts delivery system method. The predicate acts delivery system method comes through where and how people would speak like entertain as if America's name has been used one time or heard, like the legions. So the legion first moved with tribes consciously and with exception nature. And because they were consciously moving for and as the species body, where and how it is a hyper additional through in other words, as the identities it was not, but can be one way, many prayer, that is also positive unto itself, its system, that is also positive unto itself, not as criminal and insidious natures of positive treatments. That's one of the reasons it is more probable that the legion first moved with tribes. When it first moved, it did so with tribes already having been and identity defined, and with exceptions. The exception nature already known, already aware of how these three volume sciences are one. That is positive unto itself. That means all five parts of itself simultaneously are not. Otherwise, that's a criminal insidiousness nature of positive treatment per hit, though. I'm not a lawyer. The lawyers are also recorded also by the hyper evidential. Roles with offensively with criminally foreign influence, uses of all formal evidence perception locations, increasingly as collusions with self-hired uses of all other locations. By the breaching method, criminally foreign influence uses of all crime scenes, therefore, increasingly as a hypercrime scene. Slash hypercrime scene. That slash is that volume of it increasing is where now, and that's where it is the identity is the ground too. That's how it is an identity is the ground. A hypercrime scene, a torture scene. It's a method. It's a breaching method scene. Each modern country's name. Let's play this game. All we have to do, I'll train the modern countries with a virtual person that you guys just give the money to. And that will be means out of nowhere, while simultaneously better than free. I'll neighbor, because I could discern it. I don't have to be told any secrets. You guys are told secrets, then you have to keep them, or you're hurt. You have to listen to hierarchies, or you're hurt. You have to entertain all the exception nature too. Forcing the same quality details left out, nature, timing of it, motivations, narratives apparent. This is a little magic trick that knew people would defend themselves by countering things like criminal foreign influences by blaming other things, others, ourselves wrongly, even when correctly, even when needed, because needed. Nature, it knew, would demonstrate the real cause of negative value nature progresses acts of natures. It effectively employed those demonstrations, blamed on other things, others, or ourselves, effectively knowing. Correctly knowing. Then they would have to hide that having been. Rolls with. As stated uses of criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatment. Forgiveness is not to counter it and then with this, the forgiveness is to admit it and to get the value nature system as an identity grounds, identity of relationship to itself. And as our identity of relationship to ourselves as selves individually grouped in together. That if we don't use that, admit it, that might of the species body, we'll never fix the identity. Not just we won't fix the identity of the grounds, identity of relationship to ourselves. We never have a single body in a formal position that will be allowed to, or that will allow to, otherwise at the same time, therefore, anyone to be or use a quality of fact, keeping nature proper to explain our own histories. So, no, it's not just words. We were forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded to blame other things, others, ourselves for the real causes of criminal foreign influences by a breaching method. That's recorded with where and how. Simultaneously, observation of recorded replaced communications with what our founders left us to communicate for themselves. Wasn't as perpetrated, how it is gotten away with. That's self-values, roles with and as, for example. People and places, people, again, through them, like as identities as the places, representatives, uses of words like evidence or research, with logic that can't defend itself properly. And as roles with uses of exceptions and exception nature worse. So even in where this is also relative to where and how there are exceptions that appear to be in demonstration of other things, they're increasingly used to measure and maintain where and how uses of that by the breaching method are self-valued, known and discerned to an extent. Otherwise, that person's words are hurt, are changed, forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded. In other words, and everyone rolls self-valuing that, or worse, because that's what happens when you sustain that against every individual. And that's what's happening. So, in other words, even if you get the leader of a platform, which they all have boards of directors and things like that. In other words, they're all reliant upon intelligence community and database information from when we were the youngest ages. They've been tactically making class placements that are for criminally foreign influence uses of them that we can simply overcome. It only has all the power in the world because of allowed roles with denials of. So it's not even a real person. The science is. There are real people behind using and having used passions and emotions to pretend that they don't realize the sciences are abridged, or that and how they could discern it. But they must learn it each. The species body, each as one, must teach. Not because something's right or wrong. So that's about invisible but still discernible. Because what is true always? Not denying the slightest exception. Not valuing the slightest exception denied. Set up to be denied, having been denied. Not painting fake exceptions. That's one of the things people do. Like, in other words, racism or in other words, what's a race or the race? You could have a twin brother, you're going to have racism. So they're playing tricks with words because there are a certain type of child abuse that everyone came through that was self-valued roles with it. Where and how we have short words that were implied, that were communicated to be made by us, by our founders, who communicated for us to communicate about how they and why they had to counter extort the other founders, why and how they had to force them to pretend they had the integrity to go against the laws of the breaching method, why and how they had to pretend. Some of them had to pretend they were against taxes. Some had to pretend other narratives. But they all left out the breaching method. That sickly, distinctly North and South had slavery entrenched. Therefore, they were leaving out their own slavery. They're pretending about this or that. Oh, it's about T-tax. Come on now. And you can keep getting over on kids like that because they're going to be in this class they're going to be shocked and awe when you say that. Even if they go home, in other words. And then how many other subjects are going and having gone on? Already before kids get to, before kids get to middle school, they already have known. They already had identities of criminal insidiousness nature that are not interbranch, that were already collusions with the interbranch, that already demonstrated uses of that, where and how effectively measured and maintained, that which we are actually capable of discerning at each age. is actually manifest and was actually manifest. Uses of formal locations like that effectively wasn't as used to keep that needing to hide live progressions at other locations, not just to keep it at the other locations needing to hide that too. All that kept needing to hide that, and from what the breaching method effectively correctly knew would be manifest at places like on-off parks, on-off shopping centers, on-off dentist offices. Like, for example, there's a location of a dentist office, I believe before it was a dentist office, I don't know if it was a dentist office then, on Route 3. And there are some dentists brought up with people tied to the confessions of a Robert Rodriguez regarding the name Scalora. And this is also over the recorded on Facebook. They were involved with Wethersfield Police and the FBI and state police with falsified police reports, also with extended family members of theirs with other names. And as people attaching little kids, even with a principal child abuser, proven since before they got caught. He had roles also with untimely deaths. These are also police forms involved with investigations, investigators, and news illusions that they pretend that even if some of the things that were, were reported were made up, there were also roles as names with roles with predicate acts at those locations anyway. Relative, like four falsified police reports deal with crime scenes, don't they? No, in many pray. I mean, in other words, they have criminally foreign influence readings of statutes and people from other countries involved with them with that here and there, individually grouped as the countries that pretend they're legitimately speaking about their roles economically with each other. In other words, not they can't follow the law because they already invested themselves. The same people that are going to pretend they can't fathom. So there's an effective method of getting what everyone agrees about, having them pretend other, having that maintained, like obfuscated. They don't pretend they realize the celebrities and the sports stars associated with this, and they use wire crime methods and mail crime methods that for that and acts that already they already used them that forced me to have to ask online here for help. They use the social media pages of Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, WFSB, Fox Connecticut News, uh, etc. They used them criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw. They used the campuses they went to, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw. The names involved. Therefore, their family members, their neighbors. This is consciously. There's no theory. You have to get them onto paper. There are many falsified police reports and connections between them, and like the name Scalora involved. Further, with the principal child abusers campus and the Robert Rodriguez has something to do with their roles with fire departments, also with the people on off the state judicial branch offices and all along Route 3. Even these are also people conscious uses of religious locations, criminally foreign influence uses of them, where they have criminally foreign influence uses of other people's names in their own. You have their badges and gavels. Fear. Get them onto paper here. Please, Judge Napolitano, Natano, get me a response for the interbranch that forged and switched names. If they want to say it's sorry, that's all, and they made a mistake because they heard something someone other told them, that's fine. I'll forgive them. I want their names because they've been switching names with the three McGee's that have been switching names on falsified police reports, and the first one's different than the one that they admitted last time with the falsified police report, and now on Facebook. They have been obfuscating evidences, using rights to lie, using rights to project fake things for reasons they don't have right for. These are the same ones were involved when I was in middle school with overt criminal enterprises and with sexual and medical abuses and drugs abuses of little boys and girls. And then they made an influence. They use that to influence them to be standing there with a stranger, make it look like they know them. Someone takes the picture. They never had a conversation with them, and then they pretend other. Then they can't afford to discern what was really recorded there. The people that pretend that means what it does in the future, and them in the future. This is a method they're doing with they have stories associated with kids and with a kid that was reportedly attacked along Route 3 at a bus stop, which has more of the names involved with child offenders, leaders of the kids through time, and people on off the state judicial branch officers also involved with their family members' uses, and the kids of the child abusers, even though they're child abuse too, we know that they have conscious uses of each age of correlation nature being used to cover up life progressions, where they have roles with identity thefts and frauds and slanders at relative instances, and with relative formal uses of them recorded. Whole criminally foreign influence uses of courts and their family members and of the locations of their homes and the ones next to them through time recorded, conscious, leading up to the World Trade Center attack context in that context and since. They should fear with next intent. Vaccine. I teach you things.